Hello, everybody. Welcome to Youth Bombs. I'm David,
I'm Dominic.
And I'm Holden.
and we're a voice of young conservatives at Alachua County. And today we're going to talk about the topic of child labor. So, Dominic, what are your thoughts on child labor? Do you think it should be legal, and why?
Well, when I think of child labor, what comes to mind first is multinational corporations and like the factories they set up in developing countries. I think that when corporations from wealthier nations set up or outsource their labor to developing countries, that can be very beneficial for them by giving their citizens opportunities to work and make money that they otherwise wouldn't have. And of course, the circumstances in those countries are very unfortunate, with people only living on a few dollars a day and not being able to afford food. And I think that for families that struggle in that way, having their child work can actually help improve their circumstances and allow them to have the means to survive. And I think in that case, although very unfortunate, it can almost be necessary.
That's true. I would also mention I wouldn't say every less developed country, but you could basically say every less developed country is entangled with debt. And they have a lot of debt, and they try to do whatever they can in order to pay back that debt. So they rely on multinational corporations to help them economically, because they're gonna give multinational corporations things they could export for profit, places where they could produce raw material. But these multinational corporations don't care about lesser developed countries or their debt, and they don't care about paying back their debt. They just care about maximizing profit. So that's why you see these multinational corporations constantly take advantage of less developed countries. I think there was a recent scandal in Taiwan where there were a lot of people working for I believe it was Nike for extremely low wages, and especially a lot of them children. And multinational corporations were just taking advantage of that, because if the country decides, no, we don't want children working anymore, we actually want livable wages for our workers, then multinational corporations just go on to the next lesser developed country. And that lesser developed country that decided that they wanted more wages and that they didn't want children working ends up getting screwed over, because then they can't get any help economically. Holden, what do you think of this?
Okay, so in the case of countries having a lot of debt, generally this is going to be the fiat World Bank coming up and saying, we're going to give you a fiat loan of X amount of $1 billion. And generally they do it a lot of the times they do it in corrupt regimes where the politicians benefit from this fiat loan. That's the IMF and the World Bank don't have a great reputation going around to countries giving them money and it working out. It's generally more for political reasons, and that's a lot of the issue here. And secondly, when it comes to wages, whenever we're talking about what people are earning, this is marginal productivity. What is the amount of value that they're adding to the company? And your wage will reflect the marginal productivity that you add to the company. So if they're not making a lot of money, it's generally speaking going to be because their marginal productivity is very low, which generally speaking means that the capital goods are not very sophisticated that they're using. So they're not producing a lot of economic goods or a lot of economic value. So a corporation being there actually helps them or generally speaking is going to help them, because they give the capital equipment to them that they could use to increase their productivity. So the corporations being there isn't necessarily a bad thing. Now, the states taking on a bunch of debt that they can't afford is a bad thing, and the World Bank is supplying them with that money that would otherwise be being used for more productive purposes if they didn't have it. But unfortunately, that's an issue there. But yeah, I'd say that pretty much summarizes that.
Dominic, what do you think?
Well, David, I actually wanted to ask you a question relating to something you said before. I understand that you said that some of the practices of these multinational corporations may be unfair with them, exploiting child labor or whatever. But what regulations, if any, would you propose to be enforced on these multinational corporations?
Honestly, the only one that I'm really passionate about is probably just ending child labor. That results in a lot of lives lost. I don't know what we can do about getting wages up, but also I feel like that's kind of totalitarian. To force corporations to pay people certain wages. Again, the the bad thing about, like, if you don't regulate it at all, then less developed countries just can't do anything about getting higher wages, because once they ask for higher wages, the multinational corporations just leaves them and leaves them economically deprived, and they just go on to the next less developed country.
There's a flaw, kind of, which is you can't just raise the wage, you just arbitrarily. You can't. You get paid because you're producing economic value. So if you want their wages to go up, then you need to give them, generally speaking, more capital. They need to accumulate more capital. In poor countries, generally speaking, the reason why they're poor is because they don't have capital. They don't have the capital that we have here. So they need sophisticated capital goods, and you're going to see wages go up tremendously. I mean, what's happened to wages in Taiwan over the last 30 years? I mean, they've gone way up. So why is that? Their capital has gone way up since then. I mean, now, is that the only factor? No, but it's a very important factor in whenever it comes to economic development. You need capital to accumulate in these countries, and that's going to allow them to have higher productivity. And, this is the story of human history. A lot of it is just, we have very low productivity. Today, we have very sophisticated machines that give us much higher productivity, and it frees up labor for other things, and it makes our productivity much higher. So, that's why child labor has been the norm throughout history, because our productivity was so low, we didn't have high productivity. So today we have very sophisticated capital goods, which increase our productivity. We have higher wages, and children don't have to work anymore. So we don't have to have, in developed countries, a lot of child labor because of that. So these countries need more sophisticated capital goods that's going to raise their productivity, and they're going to be richer.
What do you think, Dominic?
Great. Well, I think that I would be opposed to enforcing any significant regulation on multinational corporations in terms of child labor, because I feel like that would de-incentivize the corporations from outsourcing their labor to these developing countries in the first place. And I feel that overall, currently, the way it is provides a net benefit for both the corporation and the country, because, again, they are providing people in those countries with better opportunities to work and make money than they would otherwise have. So I feel like, any regulation could potentially harm that and de-incentivize corporations from providing these benefits to developing countries.
We could also incentivize corporations to comply with certain procedures, such as not having child labor. We're not allowing for it, which is what we do environmentally. When people buy land with an endangered species, what the government does is they incentivize people to use that land in a way that will minimize any harm done to that endangered species, and they'll do that through tax deductions. So corporations could also be incentivized due to tax deductions to follow procedures such as not allowing for child labor, or specifically making sure that they don't have any child laborers working for them. Holden, would you agree with this solution?
No, I would not. You want to keep the tax code as simple as possible. Having bureaucrats decide what should be done and what should not be done is generally not a good idea. You want the companies to decide how to employ their capital, and they'll use it productively. And if not, they'll no longer have capital. So whenever it comes to child labor, I think that this is something that so whenever we're talking about a different country, then that's going to be their rules. They're going to have whatever rules they put there, and I think we should just leave it at that, and so, let the companies do whatever. But when it comes to the United States, of course, I think that the state, obviously, in an ideal scenario, should not exist, but we're in a scenario where it does. So in a scenario where it does, I think that when it comes to coal mines and things like that, right now, I don't think that children should work there. But generally speaking, child labor being good or bad is it's nuanced, right? So not all child labor is bad and not all child labor is good. But I'd say most jobs today in the United States are not a bad idea for children, or it's not necessarily a bad thing that children work there. A lot of it is just fast food restaurants, or things like that. That the children get experience working, and they develop skills in the real world, and it helps them out. And generally, they're not very dangerous jobs.
So, I disagree. We're looking at this from an economic perspective, but also some things you have to look at from a philosophical or humanitarian perspective. And it's just children who can't really don't have the age to reason. Children who should be in school shouldn't have to be working in these coal mines, or what are those things that China has, those sweatshops, where they overwork children. A lot of them die because they're poor working conditions. It's just something that I feel like the world should unite against, and I think that government should try to incentivize corporations in order to prevent these things, because child labor really doesn't lead to anything good. Like these children are out there working these sweatshops or these coal mines. A lot of them dying, a lot of them getting diseases, and they're not going to school. They're not getting educated. So what happens to their children? They're back out there in this endless cycle. They're not able to break out of poverty.
But I would like to challenge that, David. Like, what if, if you're thinking in terms of families here, what if, like, one of their children working and making a wage is the difference between them being able to, like, afford enough food to, like, sustain themselves and live? Like, what if it's an absolute necessity that they need, like, their children working in order to make enough money to support themselves? Would it be justified in that case?
I would highly doubt we get to that scenario. So what you're saying is that, like, what if just another person in the household, other than the parents, their child was out there making some of them are making like $1 an hour, ridiculously low wages instead of preparing for education. I think you wouldn't really get to that circumstance where it'd be, oh, it's a matter of life or death. I think it'd be more valuable for that child to be in school, to keep being healthy, to keep living, in order to learn, and in order to take a job that could eventually bring their family out of poverty. I'm pretty sure that a father and a mother who can make adult wages will be able to prevent them needing a child to make a couple cents or a dollar an hour in order to make sure that their family is kept alive.
I mean, well, most jobs are not $1 an hour in China. At this point in time, it's higher. But
also like in Africa, like less developed countries also exist in Africa, and yes, some of these jobs are $1 an hour. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I thought you were talking about China. In Africa, like there some places, but you got. I'd say you've got. This is the issue with what we're talking about. I think is one. Whenever in the case of China, if you look at China compared to now, or from now compared to what it was in 2000, the working conditions are way better than they were in 2000. The people are way better off. They're way richer than they were 20 years ago. It's like really not even close. The standard of living in China is rising dramatically. And, they had 65 million deaths under communism. I mean, that's China. So, and they're doing way better now. And so, So China's doing much better, and is it perfect? Far from perfect. But China, the ability, they're going to continue to accumulate capital, and working conditions are going to continue to get much safer, generally speaking, in China, most likely, as the capital continues to accumulate there. So I would say that should be said there.
Dominic, what do you think?
Yeah, I feel like if we take a hands-off approach and let these corporations develop and outsource their labor naturally, like Holden said, it'll allow those developing countries to have access to more capital and improve their manufacturing capabilities. And through that natural process, that will allow for, factories that do have better working conditions and allow for even better opportunities for people in those countries to work. So I feel like just letting the whole process just occur without any intervention will ultimately provide a net benefit for everyone at the end of the day.
What you guys pointed out was a correlation, but correlation isn't always cause and effect.
Right. But every time that capital has accumulated in a country, over a long period of time, that workplace-related deaths go down. I've yet to see an example where capital is accumulated over a long period of time in workplace deaths.
That's true, but how do you know the capital is accumulating is just from children working?
Well, no, it's not. I'm never saying that. I never said that. It's not accumulating just because children are working. It's because also adults are working, and they're making the components that are involved in the capital goods that they use, or a lot of the time, and they're allowing businesses to have profits that they reinvest to increase their productivity. So it's not just kids that are doing that, but also, I mean, most of the world, including China, you have compulsory education with kids. So I mean, a lot of them they do go to school. So. Anyway.
Yeah, but kids make such little wages that I highly doubt that it would significantly help like a family from the point of life and death, or significantly add to the GDP. Like I look at it from a moral perspective. I believe that every child has the right to life, and should have to be able to receive an education and be able to live. And what child labor really does, I believe, is just keep keep this cycle of poverty going. You instead of raising an educated, healthy workforce that can help provide for the older generations of society, which is something that these less developed countries need in order to improve. Because I mean, if you look at these birth rates and death rates chart, like a lot of them, they have like high birth rates and have a high population starting out, but it just gets lesser and lesser and lesser. A lot of them just like keep on dying. They don't be able to live that long. They're not able to live that long. But if you have children that are able to actually live, are able to get education and get healthier, are able to get to the point where they can make higher wages, that actually helps the society in the long run.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, but my question to you, David, is some of these countries don't have access to, the capital yet to be able to fund those public services like education to enable children to have better opportunities. So I feel that, like, with the corporations outsourcing the labor and allowing, maybe even if the conditions aren't ideal right now, still allowing...
The conditions are awful. A lot of them are dying. There's disease everywhere. A lot of them are worked to death, especially in the sweatshops.
Yeah, but I feel like... Yeah, but that is becoming less common with economic development. But I don't deny, yes, that still exists. But again, like as economic development naturally occurs, like that'll become less commonplace. And eventually, some of these developing countries might be able to afford to provide children with better educational opportunities. But for now, I feel like overall, like it's still providing a net benefit.
I don't think it's ever right for humans, for children to be dying in these unfair working conditions. I think it violates human dignity. I believe that all humans, just by being human, you have human dignity, and part of that human dignity is just being allowed to have a childhood, being allowed to experience an education, and not being forced to work these awful jobs for low wages. Again, like a lot of these are coal mining jobs. They're physical jobs. Yeah. Like the sweatshopping jobs where your hands are at work all day. There's disease everywhere. There's often sometimes fires in these sweatshops, and because they don't care about it. The corporations don't care about these children. They just care about maximizing profit. And adults can at least make adult wages, and they can at least have a chance of providing for their family. But these children are paid such low wages. It just doesn't seem fair at all. It just seems like it's going to keep them on a cycle of poverty. I don't think things are going to get better as long as child labor is allowed, because the next generation is just going to be uneducated. A lot of them are going to be unhealthy. A lot of them are going to die earlier, and you're just not going to be able to reach the status that higher developed countries have, which if you look at more developed countries like the U.S. and even like Brazil is kind of getting there, is where you have like a birth rate that isn't so high, but you have people actually able to live longer. And it may not be for the U.S. anymore, but the workforce of the younger generations should be able to provide for the workforce of the older generations. And you have to have that balance. And it just seems like multinational corporations are really just keeping these less developed countries in a cycle of poverty. They're not going to be able to escape poverty unless they get higher wages or are able to even live to the age where they can get those higher wages. And they're not going to be able to get those higher wages or able to live or able to get to the point where they can live those higher wages. They're not able to get education, and they're not able to get education if they're being worked to death as children and being forced to have these jobs for incredibly low wages.
So yeah, I don't think force is a good way to phrase it, unless it's the parents, of course. If the parents are forcing, that's of course generally not good. But yeah, I mean, you could take a look at. Of course, corporations care about the working conditions though for their kids, or for not for their kids, for their employees. They have to attract you because they can't force you to work for them, and they're in a competitive market. They have to make it so that there's some sort of safety or some sort of fair working condition. Why does a factory have AC? They don't need it necessarily, just to run the factory in the abstract. They have it because they know that their employees work there, and if they want to keep them in there, then they don't want it to be super hot in there. They make conditions better for their employees because they want them to work for them, and they have to balance it out. So how much am I going to spend on machinery to increase my workers' productivity so I can pay them higher wages, and how much am I going to spend on utility bills or whatever the case may be to make my working conditions safer? It's an issue of economic calculation.
I do agree, but a lot of these multinational corporations are like the only job that people can get, because in these communities they're not like in these certain areas where you have some places where you can get jobs. So then you have to sort of deal with these unsafe working conditions. And I do agree, corporations want the people that work under them to live, but it's also corporations really just act like exploitation. I'm going to put it to a simple analogy, like slave owners who would go ahead and they would all they would explicitly kill their slaves. Often they would consistently beat them, and yeah, they would still live, but they didn't necessarily they wouldn't harm them enough so that they wouldn't be able to complete their job. But they would still harm them, and they wouldn't do anything to provide safe working conditions. And that's also what a lot of corporations do.
You can't compare that. I'm sorry, you can't compare a slave owner to a corporation. A slave owner literally is the owner of another human being. That's the property of another human being. It's like a machine. I could beat the machine and nothing happens. A corporation is not like that. You work there and it's a voluntary exchange. You prefer to work there than whatever the other thing you would be doing with your time is. So and that's a completely different thing. I would never compare that. Thank God slavery's on. It's not. It's a different thing.
Okay, but we agree that corporations aren't necessarily trying to give ideal working conditions, and it's like it's all about having a net positive, and that corporations are willing to provide unsafer working conditions as long as the people working on them aren't dying.
Well, I mean, they want to balance it out. They want to make sure that their working condition, they want to make it so that they attract employees while maintaining high productivity. So they have to balance it out. And their goal is to make money, and they're not going to make any money if nobody works for them. So they want to attract workers and make their productivity high.
Dom, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think it's a fair comparison at all to making it seem like the equivalent of slavery, because like Holden said, it's completely voluntary. You could be doing something else with your time, and it's just not a fair comparison to make. And in terms of corporations creating like ideal working conditions for their workers, like of course they're not gonna make the conditions like luxurious or like what we see in the U.S. because like that would be that would hurt their profit, but they're not gonna make the conditions unsafe because they don't want their workers dying or getting hurt, because that would actually lower their productivity.
All right, that being said, thank you for watching. You can catch us Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and if you want to email us, you can email us at youthbombs@alashrepublicans.com. See you next time.